Hello and welcome to another Rogues Gallery, and on this occasion we will be looking at the enemies of the X-Men. Since there are so many villains of this superhero team, I've had to do my best to cut the list down, so I apologise in advance if I have failed to include any of your favourite characters. With that in mind, I should make a prompt start and introduce our first rogue, who is the massively popular Mystique. Despite learning to use her mutant shape-shifting powers at an early age, Mystique quickly established her human identity. By masking her powers and evil intentions, she ascended to a position of great power within the US Defense Department, giving her access to advanced weaponry and military secrets which she used for her own criminal purposes. As Mystique, she formed the second Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, teaming up with Avalanche, the Blob, Destiny, and Pyro, where they attempted to assassinate Senator Robert Kelly, a vocal enemy of all mutants. After a series of conflicts, the X-Men managed to prevent the assassination attempt. Subsequently, the Brotherhood changed its name to Freedom Force, giving up its criminal activity to work for the US government. But perhaps none are more menacing than the Juggernaut. After the death of her husband, Sharon Xavier married his colleague and atomic scientist Dr. Kurt Marco, whose son Kane would bully Charles. As a result, he would be severely beaten by his father, which fueled his hatred for his new stepbrother. After joining the army, Kane went AWOL in Korea, where he came across a large ruby within a cave upon a temple to the god Saitorak. After taking possession of this item, Marco was transformed into an unstoppable human juggernaut. Despite enemy bombs collapsing the cave, Marco survived and emerged years later as the Juggernaut. He subsequently tried to assassinate Charles Xavier after invading his mansion. Prior to this, the Juggernaut would frequently battle against the X-Men, often uniting with Black Tom Cassidy, who he met in prison. Despite losing much of his power, the Juggernaut would make peace with Xavier and fall out with Cassidy. Marco even became part of the X-Men team at a later time. As an intergalactic team of superheroes, the X-Men have come into conflict with a plethora of nefarious alien races. Perhaps none are deadlier than the terrifying Brood. The Brood are a race of alien insectoids that spread across the universe like a virus by injecting their eggs into other living beings. When the eggs hatch, the host is physically consumed and morphs into another member of the Brood. These parasites use a race of sentient space whales called the Akandi as living starships. Native to the Shi'ar galaxy, the Brood often aided Deathbird in her attempts to usurp her sister Lilandra as the Shi'ar Majestrix. The Brood has come into conflict with the X-Men and even planted the egg of a Blood Queen into Professor X. However, the team were saved by Wolverine, who was able to resist the transformation process. Although their home planet Broodworld was destroyed, many of the Brood survived and have begun to rebuild their race. Our next odd-looking alien is a leader of his own planet. Ruler of Mojo World, a media-orientated planet, Mojo is a mass of yellow flesh. This manipulative tyrant produces movies and TV shows to keep the masses entertained. Eventually, his quest for ratings drew him to Earth, where his slave Longshot tried to convince the X-Men to help him usurp their master. Despite proving victorious, Mojo II the sequel took his place and proved to be an even harsher dictator before reclaiming the reins of power. Moreover, Mojo even used the X-Men's popularity to his advantage and had them appear as unwilling participants on his entertainment programs on numerous occasions. As a team of mutants, the X-Men have had to combat many mutant-hating individuals that spread their vile propaganda to the masses. One such individual is Boliver Tras. Scientist and robotics expert Dr. Boliver Tras became hugely concerned at the emergence of mutants. He would be later hired by the US government division called Control to eliminate threats before they began. However, when his own son Larry Tras developed mutant powers, Boliver commenced extensive research into mutations and believed that they would eventually use their abilities to supplant humans. Eventually, Tras would work on Project Wideawake, where they constructed Master Mold. This prototype Sentinel was capable of building an army of Sentinels with the purpose of controlling the mutant population. Tras would later clash with the X-Men after an appearance he made on television where he communicated anti-mutant propaganda to audiences. However, when his very robots turned on him and humanity, Tras realised that the X-Men were genuinely trying to help and protect mankind. This revelation, combined with Master Mole's betrayal and threats, caused Tras to blow up the laboratory and destroy both Master Mold and himself. Another villain who's obsessed with the eradication of mutants is William Stryker. William Stryker was a fanatic televangelist who believed that the devil sent mutants to Earth as a curse on humanity. So strong was his hatred of mutants that he even murdered his own wife and mutant son. Eventually, Stryker deduced that his calling from God was to rid the world of all mutants and ordered his followers in the Purifiers to commit hate crimes in his name. After a televised debate with Professor X, Reverend Stryker ordered his Purifiers to kidnap Xavier and fake his death. He would eventually brainwash Professor X into turning against the X-Men, and it would take the combined efforts of Magneto and the X-Men to stop Stryker. As a superhero team, it is no wonder that the X-Men would clash with other factions and villainous groups. We begin this section of the gallery with the aforementioned Stryker's very own Purifiers. After William Stryker killed his family, he embarked on a quest to rid the world of all mutants, recruiting many mutant-hating people to join his mission. Stryker was later stopped and sent to prison, but his followers, now called the Purifiers, continued his path. Upon his return during M-Day, he deemed the sudden yet significant reduction in the mutant population as a sign of God. He publicly declared on television that he made the first step, and now we have to take the next. The Purifiers attempted to kill the first mutant baby born after M-Day, but failed after they were attacked by the new X-Men. However, this encounter almost cost the new X-Men their own lives. Now we move on from the Purifiers to the Marauders. Mr. Sinister's faction of superpowered mercenaries known as the Marauders were formed with the specific purpose of massacring the underground community called the Morlocks. Sinister felt that their existence was compromising and diluting the mutant gene pool. Eventually, the Marauders began a systematic massacre of the population of Morlocks. Realizing the true intent of his faction, Gambit tried to stop the genocide but was attacked by Sabretooth. Ultimately, the Marauders were confronted by the X-Men, who stopped the massacre, but not before significant casualties were sustained on both sides. Our next faction on the list is the group known as the Hellfire Club. Founded in England during the mid-18th century, the Hellfire Club was an exclusive social organisation for Britain's upper classes. It was said to be a place where members could secretly pursue illicit pleasures. In the 1770s, Sir Patrick Clemens and Lady Diana Knight saw the club become a worldwide organisation with branches across the globe. Its members included politicians, wealthy businessmen, socialites, and celebrities. Despite the club's perceived respectability, its inner circle secretly pursues world domination through accruing political and economic influence. Industrialist Sebastian Shaw ruled as Black King over an inner circle, and Mastermind mesmerized Phoenix into becoming the club's Black Queen. Other members of the American inner circles in recent years have included Magneto, Seline, and Cassandra Nova. Inner circle members hold positions named after chess pieces, with the men dressing in 18th century costume whilst the women wear risque clothing. The next fraternity within our Rogues Gallery are the aptly named Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Initially formed by Magneto, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants has remained, through its various incarnations, a major opposing force to the X-Men, with the latter's purpose being to promote tolerance and coexistence between humans and mutants. The Brotherhood has tried to gain acceptance for mutants through lethal force. Not stopping at equality, however, the Brotherhood seemed to desire domination and the eradication of mankind altogether. Originally, Magneto founded the Brotherhood as a strike force, helping him to oppose Professor X's X-Men. This initial assemblage included the Toad, Mastermind, Quicksilver, and his sister, the Scarlet Witch. Despite attacking the X-Men and humanity on numerous occasions, they never achieved their ultimate victory. Eventually, with the defeat of Magneto, this incarnation of the Brotherhood was disbanded as Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch went on to join the Avengers. In time, Mystique formed a new Brotherhood of Evil Mutants under her leadership. This faction comprised of the Blob, Avalanche, Pyro, and Destiny. Subsequently, they evolved into Freedom Force when the US government offered them amnesty in exchange for becoming government operatives. However, Freedom Force's corruption saw the unit disband. Since then, a number of other individuals have attempted to form their own versions of the team. The Toad created his own Brotherhood in an attempt to destroy the mutant soldier known as Cable. Havoc of the X-Men assembled a Brotherhood to fight against humanity after he lost faith in Professor X's peaceful vision. Finally, the mutant operative only known as X created a many-celled version of the Brotherhood in his battles against the human race. Whatever incarnation the Brotherhood takes, it is always a thorn in the X-Men's side. We now move on to the more robotic section of this rogues gallery, and there is no better place to begin than with the Sentinels. Created by Dr. Boliver Tras, the Sentinels were created to combat the newly evolving superhuman mutants who he feared would conquer humanity. The Mark I models were programmed by his scientists to protect humanity but actually turned on the human race. After kidnapping Trask, the lead Sentinel, the Master Mold, ordered him to create a Sentinel army to conquer the planet. At this time, the Sentinels were coming into conflict with the X-Men, and Trask finally understood that not all mutants were a threat to humanity. Unfortunately, Trask lost his life destroying the Master Mold, and his son Larry blamed the mutants for his father's death. As a result, he would oversee the creation of the Mark II Sentinels. However, once the Sentinels recognized that Trask was a mutant himself, they turned against him. The government would seize the Sentinel designs, and Dr. Stephen Lang built the Mark III Sentinels, but both he and they were destroyed, battling the X-Men. When mutant terrorists tried to assassinate the Senator Robert Kelly, the president initiated Project Wide Awake. Later still, Shaw Industries constructed Sentinels to combat mutant threats to national security. Professor Xavier's evil twin sister Cassandra Nova used Mega Sentinels to devastate the nation of Genosha, and even devised microscopic Nano Sentinels which attacked the bloodstream of various mutants. Finally, the government formed Sentinel Squad 1, led by Dr. Valerie Cooper and James Rhodes, to defend against superhuman threats. Our next robotic villain is actually another type of Sentinel known as Nimrod. This advanced robots from the alternate future belonged to a world where North America was controlled by Sentinels. During a mission to sabotage Project Nimrod, Kate Pryde was killed and Rachel Summers was transported to the past of Earth 616. However, when Nimrod pursued Rachel to the past, he battled the new X-Men until his time machine activated and he disappeared into the past. Eventually, Nimrod came into the contact with the remains of Master Mold, which forced the two entities to merge before they were both reborn in a new, single body as Bastion. Eventually, Bastion unleashed an infinite horde of Nimrods from another timeline to destroy the X-Men. However, X-Force, Cypher, and Cable went to that future and destroyed the Master Mold controlling them. Bastion would become Nimrod again, but was destroyed by Hope. Our next group of rogues really do suck because they are villains who require the life energy of others in order to survive. The Russian KGB super soldier was a former serial killer named Arkady Rossovich. He gained his mutant powers as a test subject when he received carbonadium implants and genetic treatments. However, complications required him to drain the life energy of victims to survive. Placed in suspended animation by the Soviets, Omega Red re-emerged after the fall of communism and sought a carbonadium synthesizer to stabilize his condition. Eventually, Omega Red would encounter Wolverine, Colossus, and Nightcrawler in an epic encounter where his enhanced skin was largely impervious to Wolverine's claws. Omega Red was finally defeated after Nightcrawler teleported him hundreds of feet into the sky and let him fall to the ground, which knocked him unconscious. The second vampiric villain in this section of the gallery is the one and only Seline. Born 17,000 years ago, Seline would be sustained through the sacrifice of her mother's people. However, after her plan to sacrifice the entire population of Rome during the Roman Empire was foiled, she was sentenced to be burned at the stake. She would later escape to the hidden city of Nova Roma in Brazil, where she was worshipped as the Dark Priestess. After learning of mutants with superpowers, she travelled to New York, where she sensed Rachel Summers' immense power and attempted to drain her life force until she was stopped by the X-Men. She would later join the Hellfire Club, where she was given the position of Black Queen. Since then, Seline has clashed with the X-Men and Rachel Summers in particular on numerous occasions. This includes an event in Genosha where Seline performed a ritual to sacrifice and absorb the souls of 1,000,000 mutants, causing her to ascend to godhood. Seline was stopped when Warpath stabbed her in the heart with the same knife used to perform the ritual. Although she was presumed dead, Seline has returned to battle the X-Men on numerous occasions. Our next energy vampire is a real favourite of mine because he is the prehistoric looking Sauron. As a child, Carl Lycos was on an expedition to Antarctica with his father when he was bitten by a prehistoric pteranodon from the ancient savage lands. From that point on, he became an energy vampire with the need to feed on the energy of others to survive. As an adult, Lycos worked with Professor Charles Xavier on Project Mutant, but was later transformed into his savage half-human, half-pteranodon alter ego Sauron. This metamorphosis occurred when he drained the life energy of the mutant Havoc. As Sauron, he would frequently battle with the X-Men. We now move on to a series of rogues who use psychological warfare to battle the X-Men. The first of these villains is none other than the Shadow King. Born in 16th century Egypt, Amal Farouk's telepathic powers emerged at an early age, and he used them to protect the market from thieves until tragedy struck in the form of a plague. After his father fell victim to the plague, Amal was left alone until the Shadow King appeared to him, offering him a deal that would promise that he would never be alone again. Amal accepted the deal and bonded with the Shadow King. A few centuries later, he became the leader of the underground syndicate located in the Thieves' Quarter of Cairo and took the alias of the Shadow King. Whilst Charles was touring, Farouk met Xavier and offered him a partnership, however he refused and challenged Farouk to a duel. After a brief encounter, Xavier mentally defeated Farouk and left Cairo. Despite his apparent death, Farouk reappeared many years later as the Shadow King once more. Another headache for Charles Xavier materialized in the form of his very own sister, known as Cassandra Nova. Cassandra Nova is what the Shi'ar call Mamudrai, the spirit that is the equal and opposite of a person. However, the genetic potential of Professor Charles Xavier allowed his Mamudrai to adopt a physical form. Whilst gestating in her mother's womb, Charles recognized his twin as an evil presence and preemptively tried to kill her with his nascent psychic abilities. This would result in his mother's miscarriage, however Cassandra survived as a growing mass of cells in a sewer. In time, she built a new body for herself whilst plotting her revenge on Charles. Eventually, Cassandra would merge herself into Trask's body and dispatch giant Sentinels to Genosha, resulting in the massacre of millions of mutants. When Cyclops and Wolverine managed to subdue her, she was brought to the Institute, where she began to exert telekinetic and telepathic control over the X-Men. Ultimately, she was put down by 6 gunshots from Charles. Since then, however, Cassandra has returned to wreak havoc on the X-Men on several occasions. We continue this section of the gallery with the Master of Mind Games. Whilst working as a carnival mentalist, Jason Wingard was enlisted by Magneto to serve as a member of the original Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. As Mastermind, he would use his illusionary powers to assist his teammates in battling the original X-Men repeatedly, but the X-Men continually thwarted them. Subsequently, Mastermind's hatred of Jean Grey saw him torment her friends, the X-Men. He succeeded in inducing Mariko Yoshida into calling off her wedding to Wolverine and caused Cyclops and his teammates to think that Madeline Pryor, Cyclops' new love, was the Dark Phoenix. Mastermind hoped to crush the X-Men's spirits by manipulating them into killing Pryor, but the X-Men discovered Mastermind's deception and defeated him. Our final villain in this section of the gallery combines the abilities of 2 mutants in order to deliver his onslaught. After psionic contact between Professor X and Magneto, Charles Xavier absorbed all of Magneto's negative thoughts and energy into his consciousness. As a result, the being known as Onslaught was born. His psychic presence remained until he became so powerful that he could finally free himself. Upon leaving Professor X's body, he became an unstoppable force of pure psionic energy. In the X-Men's first encounter with this being, they would require the help of the Fantastic Four and the Avengers in order to successfully rescue a powerless Xavier. Since then, they have clashed with this powerful adversary on numerous occasions. Our final section of the gallery contains some of the most powerful adversaries of all, the first of which is the destructive Dark Phoenix. Believing itself to be Jean Grey, the Phoenix Force became mad with power due to Mastermind and retaliated as a result, naming itself Dark Phoenix. This malevolent force would subsequently absorb the energy of the star of the Dabari system, causing the destruction of an entire world. Due to this, the Shi'ar sentenced it to death for the crimes against billions of innocent people. When Dark Phoenix returned to Earth, the X-Men held it at bay while Professor X rebuilt the mental blocks in the Phoenix mind that Mastermind had destroyed. Our next rogue is quite literally the personification of evil itself, because he is Mr. Sinister. A visionary doctor living in 19th century London, Dr. Nathaniel Essex was recruited by the ever-living mutant warlord Apocalypse, who subsequently enhanced his genetic structure, providing him with virtual immortality and superhuman physical abilities. Essex would adopt the alias of Mr. Sinister before relinquishing his human mortality to continue with his nefarious experiments into the secrets of mutation over the course of the next century. Sinister will stop at nothing to develop his knowledge of genetics, and he has played a hidden role in the upbringing of the Summers brothers Cyclops and Havoc. He is also the guiding hand behind the Marauders, a band of killers comprised of mutants and augmented humans whom Sinister once sent into the Morlock tunnels to carry out the mutant massacre. As awful as a mutant massacre is, our penultimate rogue could bring on the end of the world because he is the Apocalypse. Born nearly 5,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, Apocalypse is one of the earliest known mutants. After being left to die as an infant, he was discovered by outlaw leader Baal, who named him En-Saba Nur, meaning the first one. Baal taught Nur the philosophy of the survival of the fittest and told him he was fated to be a powerful conqueror. Nur travelled the world for millennia, instigating wars to test which nations were fittest, and was ultimately worshipped as a god by ancient civilizations. By the 20th century, Nur, now called Apocalypse, would form his four horsemen, who included famine, war, pestilence, and Archangel as death. Together with his evil faction, Apocalypse decided that the emerging superhuman mutants were destined to supplant unfit ordinary humans. The Apocalypse would come into conflict with the original X-Factor and the X-Men, who were dedicated to peaceful coexistence between mutants and other humans. Despite his incredible longevity, Apocalypse's physical body does eventually wear out, and he is forced to transfer his conscience into host bodies. In an alternate timeline, the Age of Apocalypse, Apocalypse conquered North America and enslaved humanity until he was killed by Magneto. Speaking of which, our final villain is none other than Magneto himself. Arguably one of the most powerful enemies and at times allies of the X-Men is Magneto. As a boy, he was imprisoned in a Nazi death camp where he witnessed the full extent of inhumanity towards people that were considered different. Upon his daughter's death, Magneto finally realized the full extent of his powers and decided that the only way to prevent humanity from oppressing mutants was to conquer the rest of the human race. He initiated a war by seizing a missile base, but was foiled by Xavier's X-Men. Since then, Magneto has both worked with and against the X-Men. That brings an end to this tour of the rogues of Xavier's men. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, then please list other galleries that you would like me to visit in the comment section. Until next time, it's goodbye from me. Take care.